My mother wore a white dress to my wedding, but it backfired in the best way possible. I don't have a good relationship with my mother. She was the type to demand gifts on my birthday because I wouldn't be here without her. For 18 years, I never got to open presents myself. Looking back, every event, from my games to graduation, was always about her. I always felt like my life and achievements were just an extension of her accomplishments. I think I suppressed my resentment because everyone around me always acted like this was normal. I didn't know how to cope with this, so I just tried to get as far away from her as possible. I applied to the furthest university I could realistically get in, and stayed far away because anytime I had to go back home, it was the same story. At university I was lucky enough to meet my now wife, Pia, and for the first time I started to like who I was. I didn't feel like I had to hide or play down my accomplishments, or even my failures. And her family was so warm and welcoming, it felt like my childhood was just a nightmare of the past. I thought the best way to move past it was to just move ahead. I thought I would be able to handle it now as an independent adult. After all, everyone says you're supposed to let sleeping dogs lie. And in my worst moments, I felt jealous of my wonderful fiancé for having such a welcoming, loving family, even though they were treating me like one of their own. I was ashamed of my mother's behavior, and the ugliness of my resentment, so I pretended everything was fine, and invited my parents to my wedding. I don't think I really understood how important my wedding was to me. I mean, obviously, the whole getting married to the girl of my dreams is huge, but I mean the actual details of the whole ceremony. I actually had a really clear vision of what I wanted in the wedding. But a combination of my childhood trauma and the notion that a wedding is the bride's day and not something men are supposed to care about, made me unable to express it. I also didn't understand how badly I wanted an event that would be about me and not my mother. This unholy cocktail of repressed and suppressed feelings led to me unfairly lashing out at Pia when my mother tried to pull one of her old tricks. My mother had previously joked that she would wear white, and I had told her point blank that she wasn't allowed to do this. But then my mother went to my then fiancé and asked her once again, to which she agreed. When I found out about this, I got into an argument with Pia. I told her how she was going to try to steal the spotlight, and she'll definitely show up wearing a long white dress. I told her it was very irresponsible of her to just agree like that. Eventually, when I explained her past, we agreed that going forward we should be better about communicating, and made up. At that moment, I think Pia was shocked by my outburst because she had never seen me like this. Unwanted memories kept invading my head, no matter how much I tried to bury my head in work or exhaust myself by exercising. I ended up having an actual meltdown that night. I was sobbing and crying. It was probably my ugliest moment. The next morning I half expected to wake up alone, and get a text that the wedding was off. Instead, incredibly, Pia stayed with me. We talked and I told her I wanted her to call up my mom and tell her she couldn't wear white or else she was banned from the wedding. She, understandably, refused, saying it would be a surefire recipe for open hostility. She also reminded me how she didn't really have a problem with my mom wearing white, so if I did, I was welcome to tell her if I wanted. It was starting to turn into an argument again until she reminded me that white wasn't the bridal color in Indian weddings. That's when I realized I just felt a cold sweat that another precious moment would be hijacked by my mother. She also cleverly told me that not telling my mom that the bride wouldn't be wearing white might actually work out in a hilarious manner. Then she convinced me to go to therapy, encouraged me through those first few hellish sessions, and gave me space when I needed it. Therapy really helped. I was able to understand why I was feeling angry and upset, and how to deal with it beyond just trying to ignore it. I apologized to Pia, and it let me actually be honest with her about my family. It really transformed our relationship. I took over the wedding preparation with the help of my in-laws. This turned out to be great for all of us. I got to actually design my dream wedding. My mother-in-law later told me she was really relieved that I took over because my lovely Pia didn't really care any which way about the colors or flowers. She had virtually no input on any of it as long as we were getting married. She used to joke that she was fine with just exchanging garlands and calling it a day. My mother-in-law was also very encouraging and patient in letting me voice my input. She even found things I didn't think of but loved, like riding a horse to the ceremony. We have a running joke that I seem more like her son than Pia because our taste is so similar. The actual wedding went really beautifully. Pia was ready to rescind my parents' invitations completely after my mom tried a few more stunts. But her terrifying little sister suggested we invite her anyway as a final sort of screw you. To show them I wasn't alone anymore, and no matter what they tried, this time things would go my way. I have to admit that did appeal to me, so we decided to invite them for the third day of the ceremony, and it worked even better than I imagined. First, it helped that my mother had no real idea what an Indian wedding is like. So, when she showed up in a long white tulle ball gown, security actually thought she had the wrong address and didn't let her in. This was actually something I didn't plan, but the pleasure of seeing my mother fuming by the gate while other guests were let in was delicious. Secondly, compared to the embroidered silks and sleek satins of Indian clothes, my mother's ball gown honestly looked frumpy. Instead of stealing the show, she just looked like she didn't belong. This was accented by the jewelry, the matching churi and kungan and earring and bindis worn compared to her much more sparse look. Pia looked especially beautiful in her red dress, with intricate henna covering her hands and feet. I'm probably biased since she's my wife, but she has the most beautiful inky hair and it looks stunning adorned with gold accessories on her braids. Indian brides also wear something called a mata patti, which looks like a crown. It definitely made her look like a princess. I actually forgot about my parents, and my insecurity, and pretty much the rest of the universe because I couldn't stop staring at her. Then my mother tried really hard to interrupt the ceremony. First she tried coughing, but luckily Pia's aunt sitting next to her gave her a cough drop. Then she tried to initiate a conversation. But, Pia's 5-year-old niece loudly said in that high-pitched voice of children that really projects, "Don't you know it's rude to talk during weddings?" I'm 5 and I know that. I later learned that she had been coached to respond this way by my wonderful, terrifying sister-in-law. The third time she tried to interrupt, Pia's cousin jumped and loudly whispered that the food didn't seem to agree with my mother and she needed to go to the bathroom immediately. She then basically pushed her away. After that she stayed embarrassedly quiet for the rest of the ceremony. Throughout all this, the ceremony never missed a beat and everyone else acted like she wasn't there. In the after-party, the difference between my mother and everyone else was unpleasantly accented by her ignorance of Bollywood and Tollywood dance skills. So she tried to refocus attention through conversation. She turned to my mother-in-law and started to complain about how hard it was to raise me. My mother-in-law responded, "However difficult children are, they bring 10 times as much happiness just by growing. Your son is such a wonderful young man, you must be so proud of him." My mother didn't like the direction of the conversation, so she turned to Pia and asked her if she was sure she wanted to be with me. This was after we had gotten married. Pia looked at her like she was a bit slow and said, "Why would I be marrying him if I wasn't sure?" My mother loudly asked her again if she was really sure, because I used to wet the bed. I haven't done that since I was 8, but there she was, loudly announcing it. At that moment, I really hated her. It felt like there was something stuck in my throat, but no words came out. But Pia didn't have that problem. "You must be confused," she said, and it was so confident with a touch of concern that my mother looked like she was actually confused. Then she raised her voice so it could be heard over the music. "I know we are family now, but it's much too soon right now, or ever, for me to hear about your bedroom activities." Then she dragged me away to the dance floor while people started to stare at my mother. Stupidly, the first thing I said in our first dance as a married couple was that my mother was right. But because I am the luckiest man alive, Pia just squeezed my hand and told me it happens when children are put under stress and it wasn't my fault. That was pretty much the end of the problem. I enjoyed the rest of my wedding dancing, eating food and talking with Pia and now my wonderful family. By the end of the day, my mother looked incredibly constipated, but she hadn't managed to ruin anything. I felt so relieved when I said goodbye, like a weight had just slipped off my feet and my knees felt weak. It was the first time in my life that she hadn't taken over something that was supposed to be about me. After that day I haven't had any more sudden invasive memories of the past. I feel so incredibly lucky to have married this girl.